Okay, since I read The Prince this weekend when I went to the Brewfest, uh, I was also looking up Pope Alexander. That Machiavelli talks a lot about him, and especially his son Caesar Borgia. And I was thinking, yeah, what do the Catholics say? It's the age of the internet. I can probably find a a few Catholic apologists and see what they say about these popes. What are they saying these days? It was very interesting. I mean, one part, of course, they admit that he was corrupt. But one part, they'll point out, but he didn't argue against the teachings of the church. Like that hypocrisy, at least that's good. So the people didn't decide not to become Catholic. He was still saying, hey, people, you should be this way. He just wasn't that way himself. And then this one guy, and he's a priest, was saying, what happens in times like that is God steps in and truly inspires, better priests to step up and come in and save the church and bring it back on its right path. And he himself said he was inspired to be in the priesthood by priests that he didn't think that were good. He thought he could do better. So better kinds of people decide to step in and become better kinds of priests. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, well, if you undergo a long oppression and then free yourself, you'll be more vigilant. It's like, going through a hard time, you learn how to avoid a hard time. I mean, you can't really justify things that way, but it's an interesting out, considering they have this thing of still believing in this some sort of infallibility of the popes. And so in the case of like Pope Alexander, the infallibility is that, well, it was still good for the church. It's what the church needed to go through. It was a corrupt time. It was whatever. It's how we survived it. God gave. Oh, it's kind of like God knowing Judas was going to betray Christ and then using that to spread the message of Christ. So it all worked out great. And it makes God look like a fucking Machiavellian. You think that's a coincidence? No, because this whole Christianity as we understand it, not as Christ would have probably actually taught it, not as all of the all the books that didn't make it into the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff, not as they would have had it, but as it was actually done, it was used to perpetuate this consent system that's based on a Machiavellian principle where you use virtue. You honestly do. You use virtue. Or you use cruelty, or you use whatever you have to and can. It doesn't mean you don't think virtue really is the virtuous thing, and this isn't really, they're all really themselves, and you're supposed to switch around and be super Machiavellian. And this Catholic priest is describing God as a Machiavellian. Not Christ, because he was mortal at the time. He didn't know Judas would betray him, and it's still Judas's fault and Judas's doing, but God knew, and God is using these betrayers placed in just the right place, like Caesar Borgia sending a really cruel guy to one province to straighten up all the crime they had. He straightened up all the crime, which he figured was a good thing, and then killed the guy so that he could be the scapegoat for being so cruel. And that's the kind of thinker God evidently is. He gave us really bad popes, because he wanted us to stand up. Lay Christians were being immoral, and they thought having a moral pope and going to church in a church run by a moral pope, that would save them. But hey, look, your pope isn't moral. You better get better. This kind of mindfuck kind of thing, which if it works, it's Machiavellian, because that's the thing with Machiavelli. He's like, well, in the end, there's order, and that's better for the people. That's the whole ends justify the means kind of thing, and the idea that, well, God comes up with these crazy schemes, have this guy sleep with his daughters, and then this, and then burn a bush and try to kill his kid, blah, 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 blow up a city. It'll all be for the better. We'll save the other people. It's like God's always there going, yes, I will turn the track because I know who's on the track. I will kill this one person. And, oh, this person's especially good. I will kill him so that everybody else steps up and realizes we need to be good too. And it's just like, what the? And this is what we need to escape. And it's a metaphor network. And you can easily become an atheist and still basically be riding the rails and getting off at the same old stops on the same old rail network where you just stripped off Christian Metaphor Network and put on another name, Thunderfoot Express, and it's really still this whole system, right? And I think we should scrub off all the paint underneath. We'll see, Machiavellian, moral nihilistic express, you know, subtitled uh, "How to Become Rich and Powerful with Narcissistic Personality Disorder" on your side. All right, cheers. All right, this is a video on radical feminism, capital R, capital F, because Carmel had complained that I've been talking about radical feminists, little r, little f, people that are radical, and some of the radical ideas that the MRA and people are complaining about, which of course are terrible. I don't think all men are racist and these kinds of extremities. And I'm talking about, well, radicalism is radicalism. Carmel is pointing out, oh, well, there's the school of feminism called radical feminism, and when you talk about rad fems and you mean radical feminism, that's usually short. So fine. So I vaguely recollected there was something like this when it was brought to my attention. I went off and I looked at radical feminism wiki page and stuff like this, and I'm sad to say that I don't think there's a real problem here. Granted, there are people that would consider themselves radical feminists that are not radical in this man-hating way. So not everybody in capital R, capital F, radical feminism hates men. It's not about hating men. But I disagree with it as a school of philosophy. It seems to hold that all of mankind's oppression, it comes down to this gender issue. That gender oppression is the oldest oppression. It's the first oppression. It is where you get a lot of the quotes about all sex is rape or marriage is rape and so on and so forth. Just simplistically putting everything down to the gender bias, and I absolutely don't believe that's true, not fundamentally from an analysis point of view, and not chronologically or historically. I believe the division where, the man and woman partners that are the most powerful people in the city, their bias against the pauper couple, that's more primary. That's the first forming factor, and the gender bias within each of those relationships is something that came about later and is it's not the bias, not by any means. Slavery started with, in my opinion, war. It's intimately related to war. Now, rape is a part of rape and pillage. So there's an aspect, of course, where sexual animals, gender-based, we have this as a part of, you can find it in everything for that reason. But the slavery and oppression aspect comes from this warlike nature, and basically it's whole peoples, couples, partners, and their children that get oppressed, and that's where this is coming from. So I disagree with radical feminism, and furthermore, I think it's aid and comfort to people that really are radical. I think calling it radical and reducing everything down to a feminist issue, everything, it does help protect those that want to use this kind of thing just for hatred. That in itself is not a criticism of the school of thought, but then again, it's a good reason not to call it radical feminism. You could call it, fundamental feminism. I mean, if you really want to present the theory that all of man's biases come down to the gender bias as an origin, then go ahead and make that. But it's possible to get confused frames in there, and perhaps the whole school is still a bit confused. Now, the things I've said that sound and are compatible or related to radical feminism is I do believe there's something that you could call the patriarchy that is behind the whole picture. But patriarchy is just the way it looks from the feminist point of view, calling it patriarchy because it has a patriarch in it. It has matriarchs in it as well. It has all kinds of roles. It has colonels and lieutenants and kings and princes and queens and lords and barons and paupers and peasants and servants and field workers and slaves. It's a whole structuring, right? On the political angle with modern conservatism and liberalism, Lakoff talks about the strict father family as a name for this metaphor, and it's focusing specifically on just this one unit, right? From which you can abstract why they like kingships and what kind of governments and some of their actual you know, leaf node political positions. These are all naming from a particular perspective a big thing, which is a whole metaphor system that's a Machiavellian, designed to be run by Machiavellian narcissists. And it's not the most important aspect of figuring out how the logic of this system and metaphor, it's not gender-based. So I disagree with radical feminism, even capital R, capital F radical feminism. And as for hateful people that want to use feminist kinds of sounding ideas as a language in which to express their hate, I'm against that kind of person too, and I don't even really consider that genuine. But I'm willing to say that's part of feminism because sometimes you are reduced in analysis of groups to starting from people that self-profess membership of that group. Cheers.